Welcome to the 9th Raddall Symposium Publishers Panel. Is there anyone here who's from the public, who's not part of the session? All right. Well, thank you for coming. We have been involved in a conference since yesterday afternoon at 1, and we've had a lot of fun, heard a lot of interesting papers so far. If you haven't had a chance, there is a splendid art exhibition that is currently open at the Acadie Art Gallery with picture book art from all four Atlantic Canadian provinces. So please make a point of doing that sometime over the next 6 weeks. Right, Andrea? And today, this afternoon, is going to be such a fun afternoon. We've got 2 hours to talk about publishing, and then we're going to have a puppet show. So you don't get much better than that, right? Now, I'm Sue Fisher. I'm the curator of the Eileen Wallace Children's Literature Collection at the University of New Brunswick. And because I'm a librarian and I work in a library with children's books, I always have people coming in who are aspiring writers. The question I get is, how do you get a book published? And they assume that because I'm a librarian, I know what publishing is or means. And I don't really know what publishing is or means, which is why I'm very excited today to be able to listen to and learn from representatives of the key regional publishers within Atlantic Canada. So I'm going to introduce everyone, and then they're going to go down the line, and my introduction is going to be very brief because they're going to do a more thorough job of introducing themselves, providing a description of their organization, so things like size, staffing numbers, target audience, range of titles, specializations, etc. They're going to outline the degree to which they see region operating in their organizational mandate, and they're going to briefly comment on the strengths and challenges they experience in being committed to regionalism in publishing and to working in their particular province in the Atlantic region at this time in 8 to 10 minutes. And Vivian is going to be our timekeeper, so she's going to let them know when they've hit 8 minutes, and then they will very graciously and leisurely wrap up at that point. So I think that we are going to start today with Terrilee.
Oh, we're going to start with Marnie.
We're going to start with Marnie. Oh, because she has the... Okay. My linear way of thinking does not work. All right, we are going to start with Marie Cadieux, who is representing Bouton d'Acadie, the French language publisher in Atlantic Canada. And I don't want to say anything more about you because I've given you the job of talking about you. So, Marie.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm going first because we should shut this big major publicity going on here for Bouton d'Acadie. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to hog the whole space. But I had prepared this for another occasion and didn't use it. And I thought, well, people here probably don't know much about Bouton d'Acadie. How many do? Très peu. Et combien parlent français ici? Ah, un petit peu plus. Ben, je vais quand même vous dire bonjour en français parce que les organisateurs espéraient avoir une conférence bilingue. And I think it's kind of telling, and it's not to shame you in whatever way, but that 2 miles or 2 kilometers away from Grand Pré, here we are in a place where even at Grand Pré, as you come out, the few budding commerce, businesses, I think there is one that has one little sign in French. So you can imagine what it is to be a publishing house, une maison d'édition en français au Nouveau-Brunswick. And it's also telling that you, who are specialists in Atlantic Canada literature, most of you anyway, or want to be, do not know about Bouton d'Acadie. Bouton d'Acadie started just 21 years after the Beaver Dime folded. So I don't know if there's any lien there, but it's kind of interesting. And it was very much a mission, and it still is, so I might have a hard time staying on the 8-minute button, because it's a passion. Bouton was founded by a university professor called Marguerite Maillet, Doctor of Literature, and she is called sort of the founding member or the founding university professor on Acadian literature in French. And after teaching all these years and sending off master's degree students, etc., she decided that one thing that was really crying out was literature for young people. So for now almost 20 years, we've been making beautiful books, and we're about to 200 titles, 210 titles. What you're seeing here, and we can stop at any time when you... that one is actually a Prince Edward Island, Angèle Arsenault. Some of you know of her, and this is just out. But about 200 titles. Mostly, and really our first mandate, we work with writers from the Atlantic provinces, but we've also published writers from France, Quebec, Africa, Haiti, depending on what they have to say. I mean, basically story, when the story is interesting, we have a look at it, but we really try to work with Acadian writers as much as we can, and Acadian illustrators. I find that in Nova Scotia we need to do some more work, and we're trying very hard at that level. We're very open to this, and I've been speaking to some people. One of the challenges is to get, in terms of illustrated children's albums, it's fairly easy. I'm up to my ears until 2018, in terms of my publishing production, but in terms of novels for young people, it's a difficulty. And in that sense, we are looking at, and I find there is some really fine titles coming from Atlantic Canada for young people. And we've been talking with Nimbus. We're starting a good partnership, I think, and so we're looking at translation in that sense. We've also done one title in English called Pio's Potato Present, and I think it'll be available there. And I think it's a good example of how we work regionally, because it is a title that came out in French, La Patate Cadeau, ou La Vraie Histoire de la Poutine Râpée, and it's by Diane Carmel Léger, who is a fine example of an Acadian writer who uses her history, but also ties it in with who she is as a contemporary New Brunswicker today, her ties with the Anglophone society and with the Mi'kmaq. And that's one thing that we've done that's really that was groundbreaking at one point, and that's the Wabanaki collection. That was in 2002. Now there's a whole lot of these books going around, but when Marguerite Maillet started this, doing books in Mi'kmaq, English, and French, it was groundbreaking at the time. So we're very proud of this, and we're still working on that collection. We've been trying to maybe even delegate it to First Nation publisher, but we haven't been successful yet, so we're still working on it. And I was very impressed. I was hoping to meet Leonard Paul, because I was very impressed by his illustrations. And I don't know, I haven't seen his graphic novel, but it sounds very, very exciting. To move on from tales to contemporary material, I find very exciting. And that's one of the things that we try to do. So to tell you a little bit more about us, when I took over 3 years ago, there was only one employee, full-time paid employee, Marguerite Maillet, the founding member, who started this at 76 and retired at 83. Was working for free, working out of her retirement from the university. We've managed to work and get subvention, etc., so that we are now 3 employees. We could be 5, 6, as any publisher will tell you, and would still not be enough for all that we want to do. The challenge, of course, is, as I've mentioned on the onstart, even in Atlantic Canada, we are not very well known. There's about 20 publishing houses specialized in children's literature in Quebec, and how many in France? Many titles being published in Quebec, high quality, and they're very aggressively selling in the Atlantic province. There's also the whole situation of Scholastique being very much into the schools. So it's a very arduous battle to keep the maison, to keep Bouton d'Or Acadie going. But there's a partnership, there's some interesting things going on, and we really believe in it. But as for all of my colleagues, I know it's a labor of love, and I think there will be a question a little bit later about how you balance between the commercial aspect and the literary aspect. And of course, we have to ask that for every book, because my 8 minutes are up. Okay. I must say I was very inspired by all of that I've heard this morning, and I could see ties all the time. There was this question of beauty of place or place of beauty. Well, l'Acadie is certainly an imaginary place of beauty. It doesn't exist. I started talking about Grand Pré and the fact that it's there, but there's absolutely no tie-in today with Wolfville today and Grand Pré today. But it lives in the mind, and I think that's what good literature is about anyway. And fine children's book, that's what they talk about, aspiration of a better place. And so this is what Bouton d'Or Acadie is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of those wretched scholastic flyers and coming into schools. I'm sure they come into the Francophone schools as well, but they come into the immersion classrooms, and they make you think that the only French literature you can get your hands on are translations of really bad English children's books. And
they're here.
Yes. So they're all there. Everybody know that now. They're all at the back there. Next up, we're going to hear from Terrilee Bulger, who is representing both the Acorn Press and Nimbus. And from what I understand, Nimbus has acquired the back catalog for Acorn. Is that no? No, I'm...
Separate companies.
Separate companies, but, okay, I'm thinking of something else then.
You think Cape Breton University?
Yeah, maybe. I'm just thinking of book ordering and looking through Nimbus's back catalog and all the wonderful little bits and pieces that used to be available other places. But I will let you speak to it, because as I said at the beginning, I don't really know that much about publishing.
I want to get back to the scholastic topic.
What did I do?
Oh, no. We could talk for 2 hours about that. So I'm Terrilee Bulger from Nimbus Publishing and Acorn. You probably all know Nimbus. Nimbus is the largest book publisher in Atlantic Canada. We produce approximately 35 to 40 books per year. We have published over 1,000 books since 1978. The company currently employs 15 full, well, I have full and part-time people, but we're all full-time now, as well as a number of freelance graphic designers and editors. Nimbus is specializes in publishing books for and about Atlantic Canada. We publish nonfiction books as well as subject areas, social, cultural, natural history, guidebooks, cookbooks, photographic books, as well as children's books. A majority of our titles are significant to the understanding, recognition, and celebration of Atlantic Canada. So we are definitely rooted in regionalization, and it is really frames everything that we do. We also publish literary fiction under a separate imprint. We have an imprint called Vagrant Press. It's our 10th year this year for Vagrant Press. We do about 2 books a year under that imprint, and we're going to probably have a nice celebration for that this fall for our 10th anniversary. I can't believe it's 10 years since it took us a little while to be able to publish fiction. At the time, the owners were not so keen. Fiction titles don't tend to sell as well, and so we had to kind of convince. We had to do a presentation. It's a really, really weird feedback thing happening here. I don't know if I can you hear that? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe if I move this way. Yeah, I don't know. So we're really kind of excited that we've made it for 10 years on publishing fiction. Let's see what else we answer. This year was our largest publishing activity year, or last year was our publishing activity year to date. We published 39 new titles, 8 new editions, 33 reprints. And we do digital, we're now doing digital books for most of our titles. So in some format, most of them are as EPUBs. So Acorn Press is a separate company, as we talked about. No, the other thing about Nimbus is we do distribution. So we act as the main distributor for, so that might be what you're talking about. So we do distribution for many other Atlantic Canadian publishers, and it's a big part of what our warehouse does. So Nimbus distributes Pottersfield Press, Cape Breton University Press, Acorn Press. We do some distribution into the English market for Marie's company. So a lot of our customers come to us as sort of their source for Atlantic Canadian books, but we do distribute across the country. So we have customers everywhere in every market across the country as well. So. But in 2010, I purchased Acorn as a separate company. I was an employee at Nimbus at the time. I didn't know at the time that I would eventually be able to buy Nimbus, or else I probably wouldn't have done that. But Acorn was for sale at the time, and Laurie Brinklow had been running Acorn on the side for 10 years or so, and she wanted me to buy the company, and because it was for sale, I was kind of worried about PEI literature and what would happen to PEI literature if Acorn wasn't there, and who might buy it that wouldn't understand publishing and how important it is. And so I purchased Acorn back in 2010. I do run it as a separate company. I do it on the side. So I do have a lot of weekends and evenings that I have to devote. Just like Marie, we do this because we're passionate about it. So, but Acorn produces about 10 books a year, and again, we focus only on Prince Edward Island books, books that have an interest to Prince Edward Island readers, or published by or written by Prince Edward Island authors, and. We do all genres at Acorn, even poetry, because I feel that as the only trade publisher from Prince Edward Island, I have a bit of a responsibility to look at publishing for all genres in that market, so that there is some representation from every kind of writer published on PEI. So. It's a little bit different at Nimbus because there's so many other people who are publishing in that market. But for Acorn, where you're the only one, there is a real interest in even though they don't have as much of a commercial appeal, as that's probably one of the topics later. It's more, you do have this sense of, especially when you're the only one, to be doing something for everybody in that market. So I think that I'm probably close to 8 minutes. I think, that's probably good for now. I'm not sure who takes it.
And next up, we have Marnie Parsons, who is the owner of Running the Goat Books and Broadsides out of Newfoundland. Now, how do you say where it is situated? Because I can only say the mishearing that we heard the other night.
Oh, she's thinking tourist cow, but it's actually Tourist Cove.
Tor Cove. So, and she will speak to us about Running the Goat Books and Broadsides, which publishes the Jack books that we are going to see the puppet show for later on.
Thank you. I want to thank Andrea and Vivian and Sue for this conference. It's really been lovely I've been sort of hanging around. In an earlier life, I actually taught children's literature. So it's been really fun hanging out in sessions and, listening to some of the conversations and remembering past times. Running the Goat is actually, it's kind of an unlikely accident. 15 years ago this month, actually, a friend who is a book artist and a printer and a painter, Tara Bryan, invited me up to see her printing press at Walking Bird Press. She offered that option to all sorts of people. Anybody really would, come and see the printing press, come and see the printing press. And very few people picked up on the option. But I did. I went and decided to go and see what it was all about. She said, bring a poem. I borrowed a poem from a friend, Agnes Walsh, and said, Ag, I'm going to go learn how to set type. Can I set your poem? I decided I had to have an imprint. I knew that's all I knew. So I picked Running the Goat because it is the best dance ever. It's a wonderful Newfoundland set dance. It's just so joyous and crazy and wonderful, and the geometry of it is brilliant. So I thought that would be a fun name for a press. So off I went to set this poem, and I totally fell in love. It was like this incredible transformative experience. I thought, this is the most amazing thing I've ever done. I'm so excited. And then I didn't do anything. And for 6 months, Tara kept saying, when are you coming back to print again? And for 6 months, I kept saying, I will. And then I went back and I printed another poem. And it was just as fabulous and just as wonderful. And for about 6 months, Tara kept saying, when are you going to come and print something? And I said, well, it might be time to do a chapbook. And she said, yeah, it might be. So all of a sudden, I was hanging out probably far more often than she had ever hoped at her printing press and learning how to set type. I became her apprentice for a year. And the plan was always just that I would make quirky, occasional letterpress things that somehow related to my bizarre interests. I wanted to be about Newfoundland or reflect in some way my relationship with Newfoundland. I'm from Ontario. And people in Newfoundland have been incredibly welcoming to me, despite that drawback, that personal that personal flaw. And I wanted the things that I did in the press to be an expression of my love and appreciation for that culture, especially for the folk traditions, because I'm just a fool for folk stories and unaccompanied singing and folk dances, and I thought it was fabulous. So I was poking along doing the scattered thing. And then I went down to the Ship Inn, which it's now the Ship Pub, but back then it was still the Ship Inn, a legendary place. And I heard a storyteller, Mercedes Berry, tell the story Peg Bearskin. And now I had heard a version of that. Anita Best told that once in London, Ontario. And she told a version from Mr. Pius Power, Sr. of Southeast Bight. And Mercedes was inspired by that, but it had been adapted by Andy Jones, who you all know, and Philip Dinn, who I think some of you here will know and remember with great fondness. And I just totally loved that story. I just fell completely in love with Peg, and I thought, I want to make this book. So I summoned up all my courage and said, Mercedes, can I make that a book? And she said, well, you got to talk to Phil and Andy. So then I summoned up all the rest of my courage, and I asked them, and they said, yeah, sure. That would be great. So I started to think about how I imagined that book, because one of the things that was really nice about doing quirky, weird little letterpress things whenever you felt like it was you could make the book an object in all sorts of interesting ways. It could be an accordion book, it could be a fold-out book, it could be... And here was this story about this big, ugly, hairy woman, and I thought, what does she deserve except a big, ugly, hairy book? So I got Ellie Cohen, who's a beautiful artist, to do some lino cuts, and I convinced somebody else to sew some fur coats for the jacket, and it was going to be this really quite interesting, high-end, 100-copy, letterpress, fuzzy book. But I knew that it was a wonderful story, and I knew that it really deserved more readers than I could offer it as a furry book. So I actually called Andrew and said, would you ask Gaspereau to do a facsimile of Peg Bearskin for me, which they kindly did a beautiful job. Andrew and Gary were just great. And that was it. That was going to be the end of Running the Goat doing trade books, because I was never interested in offset books. I was just going to do these quirky things. And then Andy Jones met a puppeteer from Slovenia. And things totally turned around. When Andy and I had actually done another book together with Michael Crummy and Andy's partner Marilyn Bernard called Three Servings, which was all about boiled dinner, which is the quintessential Newfoundland meal. And it was really fun. It was just sort of a series of monologues and a recipe and a poem. And we sold it in the letterpress, the fancy version, we sold in a little pudding bag. And that was really fun. But I always wanted to work with Andy again, and he said he'd met this puppeteer, and they were working on a puppet play, but it would make a really good book. And I couldn't help but agree. But I also realized that I couldn't do that as an as a letterpress book. It had to be offset. It had to be digitally produced, commercially produced. And so things just really, the whole focus of the press, it didn't shift, but it magnified in ways I had never anticipated. We hired Veselina Tomova, who's a graphic designer and an illustrator, and she's from Bulgaria, and she studied in Leipzig. And she did the graphic design for Queen of Paradise's Garden, and now she does pretty much all of the graphic design for Running the Goat books. It was a really lovely fusion of Eastern Canada and Eastern Europe, Slovenia, Bulgaria, Newfoundland. And it's just been continually exciting and energizing. The press now has two strands, complementary strands, I hope. One is letterpress, because I still do the scattered thing, and the one is offset or trade. The mandate is and always will be Newfoundland literature, I think. I say that, but if you had told me 15 years ago I was going to be running a press in Newfoundland, I'd have thought you were crazy. So when I say it'll always be Newfoundland, who knows what it'll be in 5 or 10 years, but for the most part, my focus and my interest is in Newfoundland, especially in the traditional culture and stories, or something that engages the oral language and culture of the place. I want books that are beautiful, engaging, that maintain the production values, even in the offset of the handmade ones. So the handmade ones, it's all about the paper, right? So I get this fabulous paper from Czechoslovakia, and I get beautiful handmade cover paper from Saint-Armand in Montreal, and Japanese papers, and it's all very lovely. So I want some aspect of that very tactile, very engaging presence to come through in the letterpress, or the offset. Thank you. The press is essentially me. As I said, I hire Veselina Tomova to do graphic design, but that's sort of on a contract thing. I don't really have other employees except occasional people. Sometimes my daughter will come and help out. Andy's partner, Marilyn, comes and helps at trade fairs and things like that. I've been blessed with the friendship and support of a lot of people and presses around Newfoundland. And actually, Sue, thank you very much for calling Running the Goat one of the key presses, because I'm about the smallest and the quirkiest press in all of Newfoundland. Breakwater is the key press, yes. Yeah. I'm the key quirky press. Let's go. But I've been very much blessed by Brick Books, which is a small press, poetry press in Ontario. I was one of their editors for almost 20 years and maintain close connections with them, and they very kindly work as my agent. Oh, really? Okay. There you go. Okay. I'll just put in my little thank you to them. Okay. They work as my agent, and they help me with distribution and promotion, so that's really great. And really, Running the Goat would be in dire straits without their kind help. And I guess that's all I'll say for now. Thanks.
And everyone's going to have much more opportunity to speak, because we have a number of questions for them, and then if there is time, we're going to open the floor to questions. So you will hear more from each person on the panel. And last but not least, we have Andrew Steeves of Gaspereau Press. He is the co-founder and co-owner of Gaspereau Press, and they are located right nearby in Kentville. And I'll let you take it from there, Andrew.
Thanks. Well, thanks for asking me to come. This is my kind of commute. Yeah, Gaspereau's kind of a funny duck. It's been around, we're our 18th year. We are essentially original to a certain degree within the context of Canadian publishing and in the mix of things that we do. I guess you might say that we started out in the tradition, though we weren't really aware of them, of the Coach House Press and Porcupine Squill presses that were started in that great boom of Canadian letters through the 1960s and early 70s. Before the Depression really hit and before textbooks stopped really being a big deal and libraries started cutting back, there was really pretty good times in Canadian literature and publishing. But Porcupine Squill and Coach House Press were houses that took on their own production, kept them in-house. There were others. Vehicule Press, for example, started out that way as well. But so when we started out and started taking on more of the blue-collar side, mostly because my business partner, Gary, and I are both rural New Brunswickers, and we didn't want someone else to have all the fun bits while we sat in offices. When we started taking that on, we looked around for ways to understand what we were doing and look for context, and the context we found were people like Tim Inkster and Stan Bevington. And the other context we found was, of course, a whole lot of dead people, ranging back to the very beginning of printing, who I consider my colleagues. So we were trying to reunite these sort of disjointed bits, the sort of post-industrial revolution split of things into small tasks that were handed off to specialists. We were trying to reunite these. So that's been a big part of our mandate, I guess. Though that seems too grand a word for what you just ended up doing because it's what fell in front of you. We also, I think, we think like Marnie's letterpress, private press operation, but we have the reach of a trade publisher. So we've tried to marry these two, as you're trying to do now as well. I mean, we're trying to sort of have our cake and eat it too, to make things, to make objects that we, in a way that we see as culturally valuable, in a way that we see as personally valuable, and yet to engage in a broader conversation. I mean, there's lots of, I'm going to defend Scholastic for just a moment. I mean, there's a lot of, and I'd be the last person you'd normally expect to be. But there's a lot of things you can say about the problems with things like Scholastic, but Scholastic saved my life. I mean, there wasn't a good bookstore in my community, and my parents didn't take me to libraries. And if it hadn't been for that trickle of books coming from somewhere, I wouldn't be here doing this. I certainly wouldn't have ended up doing an English degree, and I certainly wouldn't have ended up doing journalism and ended up falling into this. So, it's a big ecology, and there's room for the crocodiles in it for me. I mean, but we just have to make sure they don't take over the whole swamp. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, let's work on that. But I mean, there's anyway. So, but as far as just the sort of blunt facts of the company, we're really quite small. We do about 10 to a dozen trade books a year, and then we do letterpress projects alongside of that. We do a fair amount of printing, not so much for other publishers, but in the community and internationally even. We do the North American edition of the Fine Press Book Association's Journal, for example. Sebastian Carter of the Rampant Lion Press in the UK does the UK version. That's pretty good company. So that's kind of the range of activity that we do all our own distribution, we do all of our own marketing, we do all our own sales in-house. And in the early days, we sort of toyed with we've always done our own distribution, and we're told that it was a bad idea. And I remember, maybe the third or fourth year of my business, and Jack David from ECW Press is sitting in my office, and he gets a phone call from Anna Porter saying that their U.S. distributor has gone Chapter 11, and General is just going down. And he looked at me and he said, "Maybe you should teach me something," which was a massive overstatement. But anyway, so anyway, from the beginning, we've sort of tried to find a way to keep it at a scale that we can control the quality and the cost. And and do things in-house and do them to the standard that we want. And we've resisted, as I think most of us have, sort of the out-of-the-box, you have to do it this way, kind of, this is how it works. If you don't do it this way, you're not going to get anywhere. So, like, I think when you're functioning in any kind of business in a smaller market, at some levels it's harder, and other levels it's easier because you are able to kind of sort of write your own ticket as long as you can, keep the doors open. So anyway, I don't know how much longer I want to ramble about this, but I guess the other thing I'd add is that we don't view ourselves at all as, we don't publish children's literature. We did one YA novel early on and sort of, after walking into that door, nose first, realized, hey, that's a very different thing than the other things we do. And we're primarily a literary publisher. We do a lot of belles lettres. We do some history. In the absence of a real serious academic press in Atlantic Canada, we end up picking up a title or two that way once in a while when we know there's enough crossover into a trade market. But that's kind of the shape of what we do. But as far as being a regional press, while we certainly are a serious player in the region and publish a lot of people here, and we really view ourselves, as a national publisher, and our market. When you look at even where our sales are coming from, our sales are not here primarily; they're Ontario and BC and other places. And so regionalism is a sort of concept I struggle with, or maybe I don't and should, but I just don't. I believe strongly you start in the local, and everything after that is details. And so I try to be a player in my community and to look after my community, and out of that, the health of that situation, to be able to have an impact, certainly across the country, and to some extent be part of an international conversation, but also a conversation that's going forwards and backwards in time. So, thanks.
When we knew we wanted to do this panel, we wanted to have it as a question and answer, but what we did early on was to solicit the people who had registered for the symposium for questions, and we then took the bits and pieces that had come into us and devised 3 questions to start that some of you will recognize as the questions that you posted. And so I thought we would start with those questions, and then we can open it up to the floor. Now, of course, when a bunch of academics propose questions to a bunch more of academics, and then those academics write them up as questions, they're no longer three words long. So I'm going to read the question, and they have seen them before, so that this long-windedness is not going to come as a shock to the people on the panel. But I will read the question, and but for each question, we've narrowed it down to sort of 2 or 3 words, so you get the gist of it. So the first question is in the category of aesthetics versus marketability. Paul Rand, in his influential 1970 book, Some Thoughts on Design, wrote the following: "Even if it is true that the average man seems most comfortable with the commonplace and familiar, it is equally true that catering to bad taste, which we so readily attribute to the average reader, merely perpetuates that mediocrity and denies the reader one of the most easily accessible means for aesthetic development and eventual enjoyment." A lot has changed in the worlds of publishing and design since 1970, but the notion that there is often a divide between artful books and books that sell has never really lost its toehold. Can you comment on this divide? Has it narrowed, widened, changed in significant ways since 1970, or even just over the course of your experience within the publishing world? How does the pull between literary and/or design aesthetics and marketability affect the work you do and the books you publish? And is there still value to Rand's observations, or are they now branded with the elitism of an earlier age in design? Who would like to start?
I started to write. I'll start.
Yeah, Terrilee doesn't have to start. Marnie, why don't you start? Because Andrew just talked, and then, nobody has to feel the pressure of going. We'll try and divvy it up.
Yes, I think that's a really important observation about the value of aesthetics, and I think it is really important to not to dumb down to your audience. And I'll speak in particular in terms of children's books, because although Running the Goat does all sorts of stuff, but in terms of trade books, my main focus is children's books, and it's because that's that's what I love. I've worked for years in children's bookstores too, and I was always amazed at people who thought that you had to buy books that were they had this notion of what kids wanted and what was good for kids, and that didn't necessarily have anything to do with the real world of children. So you couldn't buy them a book that had a big word in it. Sherry was saying, I think it was you saying soporific. Was it last night? No, it's Deirdre, right? That, you couldn't have soporific in a Beatrix Potter book because it was too big a word. And I used to have the same problem when I'd be showing people books by William Steig, and the pictures weren't right and the words were too big. And I kept saying, no, the kids will love the sounds, and the pictures are perfect. I think we have to go for quality, and at least that's what I want. And I don't really care if the books are the right shape to fit on a bookshelf, as I've been told in the past. Or I will say that I have wrestled with it, because at the same time you want the books to sell, and I made a decision to change the paper in Andy and Darka's book series recently to get something that was a little brighter, that would do more with the colors. And I probably shouldn't be saying this publicly on tape, but I actually really regret that decision every time I look at those books. I love the new book. I think it's great, but I don't like the paper, and I just cannot make myself like the paper. And I actually was in Scotland recently and met with a children's publisher who does beautiful books, and I showed her all the books. And when I put them out on the table, as soon as that one went out, my heart sort of sank, because I knew that everybody else might think that looks great, but my vision of what I want those books to be and what I want them to represent is not that paper. And when I was speaking to her about it, she said, you can't make that kind of compromise, because the people who aren't going to buy the book because it's not on the right kind of paper, they're not your market anyhow. And I think that was my little learning moment. She also then went on to tell me that they weren't the right size for the bookshelves, but we'll overlook that. we'll overlook that. But I think it is always, everything is a process of learning, for me, at least in my experience of working in sort of the more commercial aspects of publishing. And I just resist the commercial aspects of it, and I think that's I think that's a good thing. The books that I used to be able to really sell, I worked at a children's bookstore, the books that I could sell were not the scholastic. They weren't the sort of the cheap things that they were the really interesting art books, and it was what we used to call a hand sell. I mean, if you walked into an independent children's bookstore, and I hope all of you are still doing that on a regular basis, or any independent bookstore, the staff know the work and they sell it, and that's where, for me, the kind of books I want to make books that are sold by people who love them and understand them and go for it. They're never going to be big sellers in chapters. It's not going to happen, so I might as well reconcile myself to that. So, answer the question? That was awful, did you say? Awesome. Thanks. So,
Well, take it from the goat's mouth. Not bad for second language speaker, right? No, I feel exactly the same way. And there's a book maybe you saw up there that we decided would open this way. There's all'italienne, I don't know how you say. And people have been telling us, but they're too small and they don't fit on the shelf, but I'm thinking this book is called Under the Bed, and so we're going to go and look under the bed. And it's worked very, very well. Teachers love it. And then we've done Under My Rock, and so it opens like this, because you're going to look under the rock. And so for me, every book is, and even though it's trade and they're not handmade, and there is a commercial aspect, if I want to keep doing Francophone French books in Canada and outside of Quebec, but even if I was in Quebec, I have to think about my market, I'm sorry. But I think about it in the way that I buy books, and that my friends and family buy books, and that the teachers who are open and want good books think. And I think if I like it, it's going to happen, and then I can talk about it, I can write about it, I can get other people excited about it. And one thing I'm seeing in Quebec and in France, but mostly in Quebec right now, and I know that we get bad points at Canada Council because of it, but I'm going to keep doing this. People are serializing, I guess if that's a word, looks of books in children's. So you have sort of the passé 1950s look, or and so, and you know, we're being told by, in the Quebec Market and Canada Council, oh yeah, but you have to have like a editorial line so that all the books have kind of a similar feel. I want books that are big. I want some that are small. I want some that have, like we did for La Patate Cadeau, because it's patate, so we did a linen cover, cost us more, but I love it. And that's what it's going to be. I might have to adjust a little bit the price or whatever so that it fits, but so yeah, I'm just babbling on because you were perfect. There you go.
Well, I guess my comment about this is that, you know, the bad taste side of it. I mean, I guess everybody, but to me, everybody has different tastes. I don't know that anybody's taste is better than somebody else's. And I think when you're doing a book for a specific market, you have to think about who that market is, and it might be different than your own taste, and you want to create something that's going to appeal to that market. So if you're going to publish a horror book, you have to think about who the reader is and who's going to be the person who is going to love and enjoy that book, and it might not look the same as your literary fiction. And but all of that said, I think once you create something that you like and you care about, and I mean, every time we get a shipment of our advanced copies of our books, it's like Christmas at the office. It's just like, we all love opening those books. And so, you know, it is important that we love it, but I think we also have to think about who is going to be the person who's going to have that book on their bookshelf for years to come, and what they want as well, and who's going to be the person who's going to be reading it under their covers at night, and their taste might be different than mine. So I don't think that their taste is bad, and I don't think that mine is good. It's just different. So to me, that's what that is about. So.
Nobody's going to take Paul Rand on? Does everybody know who Paul Rand is? I mean, we've read a quote from him. Paul Rand was a well-known American designer, in the New York scene especially. Taught at Yale, if I'm remembering right. And he was a proponent of modernism, essentially, high modernism. So he's coming in the heels of sort of the Swiss school, Helvetica, right? The grid, all of these real changes in approaches to design. He did some, but ultimately he was not known as a book designer. Fundamentally, he did things that you still see around, like the Yale University Press logo, IBM logo, you know, on and on and on. He was mostly designing for the corporate scene. I think the whatever preceded GQ, I think he was designing page layouts and so on for stuff like that. So this is the kind of stuff that Paul Rand really knew about, and it's kind of a funny quote to pull out from him, in my opinion, because it sort of implies that there's and certainly he experienced this as a designer, there's a reluctance towards change. He was trying to introduce two pretty stodgy American publications and you know, pieces for print. These what seemed to at that time very clean, new, progressive, you know, high modernism. And just like in the architecture sort of world, people resist that kind of change. The irony, of course, which no one probably has dug deep enough to realize, is that Paul resigned his position at Yale, again, I think where he was teaching, I could be corrected in that, but when a postmodernist feminist was, given a job, because he felt that was, crazy, and that, and incoherent, right? Because it didn't line up to his stodgy and his, yeah. so anyway, we all struggle with change, I guess, is where I'm going there. And Rand is kind of he certainly had some wonderful things that are worth looking at and seeing, as did Jan Chickold, who would be his inspiration, the guy that kind of in his early 20s said all design is crap, but and proposed a new Swiss essentially way of doing things. But when he went later to Britain and worked for Penguin, he designed this sort of classic template, that made Penguin books what they are, and not because he realized he was wrong, but because he realized that digging a hole for a grave is different than digging a hole for a fence post, and which is really what you're coming to. That you have to understand. You have to understand the purpose. And this is where I think we misunderstand design. In this day and age, we all think about design, we think taste. We think, what I like is as good as what you like. And design is not that. Design is actually a much more complex and wily sort of social construct that involves understanding materials, understanding purpose, understanding this complex thing that is, in our case, the book. And it isn't just bedazzling the stapler, it is a lot more than that. It's not picking the paints. It's not even feng shui. I mean, it is a, and so when I talk about design, and I've written a book about this, it's back there, I hope. I'm happy to sign them. I have children. Did I tell you? That didn't sound too desperate, did it? But the thing about when we think about design, we do think about these kind of did you pick a nice typeface? What did you use this cover versus that cover? I mean, those are all important decisions, and they do absolutely relate to who is my market, what is my purpose? Is it a grave or is it a fence post? But design also comes down to this understanding the purpose of things. And if the world is willing to sort of walk into the dollar store and buy the cheapest hammer ever, that is just not good for anything beyond hanging a picture in your living room, then we all suffer. And it's not a matter of taste of I like the pink-handled hammer, or I like the yellow. It's that the hammer has to accomplish certain things in a certain way. It has to be balanced, and it has to, and if we lose that element of design because we're too busy to picking the paints, then our lives are all degraded. So, if you're publishing a children's book and you have to make a decision, is it important to sew this binding, or which is a little more expensive, or do I perfect bind it, which means it won't last as long, but it's a little cheaper so more people can buy it maybe. I mean, you're balancing these things, and there's not, we all come to different conclusions often, but you're trying to balance these things and understanding their implications. The problem becomes when we forget that there's a difference between those two things, and we forget that there's a cost to not sewing a book and just sawing the back off, that it's not just it's cheaper, hey, that's great, that there actually is a cost. It changes how that book can travel through the world and how it can function, and sometimes it's the right choice, but we have to make it knowingly. So that's what design is about.
Okay, number 2, and it is also long-winded. The catch few words are self-publishing versus traditional publishing. A couple of our symposium attendees are interested in the trend towards self-publishing. They cite examples of people from the region who have encountered success with self-publication. Can you comment on whether this is indeed a trend or not, and reflect on the way it may or may not be advantageous to self-publish regional and/or children's books? What do traditional publishing companies offer authors and illustrators that the experience of self-publishing does not? That's a huge question, I realize, because you offer them the world. But tackle it as you may, and I think we'll start with you, Terrilee.
Sure. Well, I think I definitely don't think self-publishing is a trend. I think even Jane Austen had to pay for her first books to be published, so it has been going on for a very, very long time in many different ways. The way that people are able to self-publish now is a lot different. Of course, anybody can go to Amazon and put their files up and have a book, and a digital book, and so I do think it's easier. There's a lot more formats now. There's so many different companies offering different services, and so it does make it easier for people, and they don't have to have the same kind of financial outlay as they would have had to have in the past. And so maybe you see it more, but I don't think it's a trend. For the part of the self-publishing regional and/or children's books, it is a little bit different. These are both really different questions. A regional book often could be self-published, and that might be the best way to go. If you have a book on your community or your church, and your market is one place, then you are going to, if you know who your market is and you know who to sell it to, then you are in a better place to probably self-publish that, and you know exactly how many to print, and it takes a lot of the risk off for you. But, sorry, yeah?
And one thing I can say is that it was 2 or 3 questions that had come from us, but there was one example cited, and that was of a man in Fredericton who has written, it's a YA novel, but about the Macadam train station, and he just keeps selling out all his editions, but he's working it at the farmer's market every week. And so when we put in the regional and children's, it was sort of drawing on the example that had been given to us, and that's just a bit more context for
that, yeah,
where
yeah.
that question came from.
Okay, great, yeah. So, especially if it's a regional children's book, of course, then you know the teachers, all that kind of thing. The one thing that we can bring to the table that you can't do is the marketability to all the different, the broader market. So if your only market is going to be at that one farmer's market within that area, then that's fine, but you won't necessarily be able to get your book into the bookstores across the country. There's just a system that is set up that doesn't allow for people to go into the bookstores and go to Indigo and just be able to say, I want you to take my book, and have it bought across the country. You could go into each individual store and get them to take the books on consignment, but they only have so many spots that they will put consignment books. And so we have, as traditional publishers, we have the supply chain sort of down. So we have everybody buys books from all of us, and that they know where to find us. We get orders from the bookstores daily, so even if they don't take your book right away, they can always get it. So, I think, and you don't necessarily take out the other market. So at Acorn, I have an author who's at the farmer's market every week in Kingston. She is constantly ordering 50 books here, 50 books there, because she gets a good discount off of the books, and so she does really well selling the books on her own at the farmer's market. But then her books are also everywhere else as well. So, and then there's the other side of that is the awards. So many of the awards nowadays, they won't accept self-published books, and so until that changes, if it is a book that is sort of award-worthy, often it would get missed at those jury levels, because they just flat out don't take self-published books. And the reason for that is there's just so much of it, and they rely on publishers to sort of curate that. It's not true. We don't publish every award-worthy book, that's for sure. But they just have to make a cutoff somewhere on these awards. So I think that is, especially for those type of books. That's my take on that. But we also offer more in the sense of the marketing as well. We just have a team that does the work for you in the editorial and the design and the marketing, and so it just makes it easier for you to focus on your writing and your illustrating rather than on doing the business of publishing. So I don't know if that answers.
Do you want to go next, Marie? No. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, one thing a professional publisher does, and you know this, but is work with the author and work with the illustrator. And the regional aspect there is I know that I turn away many manuscripts, but the ones I get from the region, no matter where, Atlantic Canada, but that I feel there is possibly an author there, but lots of work to do, and maybe we won't publish it, but I do take the phone or write an email and respond and give some, I don't comment to manuscript, but I give them some, you know, an idea of either where to go or to come back later or to talk to me when they're in, because I'm not going to write a 3-page evaluation on the manuscript. I don't have time, but I will accompany them. And I do this constantly for our writers, I would say, which are possibly not even writers, but who have an interest, who have thought about a children's story, who have something on paper, of course, but, and that's something that self-publishing will not do for these people. They can find a place where they will print it and can say, I have a book. And also in terms of illustrations and the whole aesthetic work of the book, that's something that we do. But I think all of you people know this. I'm not adding anything there. But one thing I find that in the children's world is happening that's interesting in terms of self-publishing, and Sophie Bérubé is doing some work here with families, etc. And I see it in schools, where schools put together books in terms of a classroom project, etc. And I find that quite interesting, as long as they're, and in any case, it will happen and it will be done. But I find it at the last book fair in PEI, the Francophone book fair, second time round, a big success. School classes came, schoolrooms came with the books they had prepared, but then they invited either publishers or writers to sit down with the kids and examine their book and then comment and discuss. And it was a great way to talk about what do you, how do you work a book? How do you go further? So that was a very interesting experience. One thing that I don't know if you will be talking about, but it's we talk about self-publishing, thinking about paper, but there's the whole e-book publishing. And at the last American e-book fair, they actually came up, and it was very reassuring to me because it's a whole problem. I know it goes into the third question, but maybe then I'll jump my turn. But the sales for ebooks is not at all what the government would want us to think and to work for. So we invest a lot in it, but it's not happening. And even the American market is seeing a drop in the sales of ebooks. And one of the comments coming from that symposium was, well, right now, all of the people that we're asking questions about this from age 18 to 35 are saying that one day they're going to publish a book, and it was a majority. And we're not talking about just bookish people, but just people who come in through the symposium and who buy ebooks. So it's kind of interesting. Everybody's going to become a writer. Well, if everybody becomes a writer, maybe everybody becomes also a book buyer. Maybe, we can hope. Or at least a reader of their own book.
You want me to go so I don't go last all the time?
Sure.
Because it's dangerous to let me go last all the time. I like going last so I can think longer, but anyway. We've been talking to each other for a long time as a species, you know, like it's an old thing, telling stories to each other and trying to remember them and to have them, you know, have a resonance beyond the moment in which they initially are kind of sprung from. But, you know, publishing relative to that is a really kind of young and modern endeavor. I mean, printing itself, you know, where things really got it kicked off, it's only about 500 years old, and from the beginning of that, there's been some element of this mix, of people who finance their own publications and people who are taken on, one of the things that has always stood between, the general public and the public when it comes to publishing has just been the technical means. So there's been just a small number of people who have the capital and the technical means to kind of maintain this equipment and keep it going, and also to maintain the trade networks that come with it. And so, even certainly these networks were established even by the 16th century, earlier even. So we've been at this for a while. But there was always like the church, or there was the influential who had the cash to come and bankroll projects. And sometimes it would be in shares, and sometimes they would pay the whole shot. This is an old problem. But what has shifted, I think, of late is, our modern conception of the book trade is really only a century or so old, and it came with the sort of advent of even the paperback, which is not even really a century old. And we started talking about volume. We started talking about moving a lot of product, and we started talking about the infrastructure that requires. And interestingly, I think the book trade got a little lazy, maybe. They lost sort of touch with how things were spinning and changing. And we've suddenly arrived in the contemporary moment where we have hyperextended that trade to some extent to beyond kind of what is sustainable, as we've done with just about everything we've touched. I don't know what's up with that. But so we find ourselves in this moment where technologically we've seen big change, and suddenly there isn't that barrier to reaching a broad public, whether it's through an ebook or a podcast, or even like a laser printed book that's, when bound, looks almost as good as a printed one because the printed ones have gotten so poor. So the barrier is closed, and our affluence has increased. So there are more people. We have a bigger middle class ultimately than we had, say, 100 years ago, and more people have the coin to put down on the table and say, "I've collected these stories that my grandfather told me," and off it goes. So that's the context. As to what it means and where it's going, I don't really know, actually. I find that at the end of the day, it's about the quality of those stories and about our commitment to finding the right listeners or the right readers for those stories. So, an established publisher has still technical means that aren't necessarily, they may be available, but they're not necessarily employed by the broader public. And they have the knowledge and the expertise, and still the connections into those trade networks still that are thinner and harder to come by. And so, I think going forward, it's an interesting dilemma. And I don't see it as a sort of either or one threatening the other. There's so many books that come across my desk that I know that author can go to the farmer's market and sell copies of it, and they should. But I can't sell it nationally. And I'm not as interested in that story as they are, because it wasn't my grandfather. And their grandfather, frankly, wasn't that interesting. But compared to my grandfather. So, there's a place for this, and I think that, we want to, does it all have to be equal? Does it all have to be of the same quality? Does it all have to be, no, it doesn't have to be. This is, what makes the flavor of the soup interesting is it isn't all carrots, Anyway.
I wish you'd gone last. I'll just speak very briefly that I don't think of it necessarily has to be an either or, and it's really in a way about finding your community. And some people will find a community through a traditional publishing means. Others have a really wonderful reading and supportive community who will help them edit and come up with something, and they'll find their community for creating the book, and they'll find their community for promoting it and distributing it, so really, the point is to get the stories out there, to get the poems or the pictures or whatever it is out there to enhance the broader community, and there are lots of ways to do that. I can certainly recommend getting a printing press. That's a really good, right, Andrew? Absolutely. What do they say? The only people who really know freedom of the press have their own printing press, isn't that? Something like that.
Own the means of production.
Own the means of production, yeah. But there's no turning back once you start collecting lead. That's the other thing. Yeah.
It's a progressive disease.
It is.
We have one more question, and this one thankfully doesn't have a versus in the middle, because the first two, they were versus questions, which sort of set up that oppositional way of taking apart the question. So, and this one, once again, is quite wordy, but bear with me. The picture book is dead. Long live the picture book. Poetry is no longer marketable. Attention spans are waning, but so too is the short story genre. Long fiction is on the rise. Regional books are our bread and butter. We need to think beyond the local in a global digital age. Print is here to stay. Ebooks, touchscreens, and apps that gamify reading are the future. Media reports on the future of publishing are chock full of contradictory prognostications. I said that out loud in front of people and it worked. Can you comment on publishing trends? What changes have you made to your catalogs in recent years? What kinds of manuscripts are you currently soliciting? Where do you see the market going in 3, 5, and 10 years? And I know, nothing small, eh? And how do regional books and books for young readers figure in your marketing forecasts? And Andrew, why don't you start us off?
I wrote a book about this. It's for sale. Thank you. I don't know. That's such a gigantic bunch of stuff. I think all you can do is answer that in the most general terms, and that would be to say, publishing is about citizenship, in my opinion. And citizenship is about paying attention and engaging and looking at for the people within reach, for starters, and then moving beyond that. And if you are doing something in the publishing realm that does those things, that engages, that pays attention, that looks beyond your own well-being to the well-being of your neighbors, you'll be fine. Do it with love, and it will go okay. And if you're writing a book that fits into that, that's the kind of book I'm looking for. And that's the kind of book I intend to be publishing, until I can't do it anymore. So I'll stop there.
And so even you first, you're kind of Andrew more or less said it for me. For me to forecast, 5, 10, 20 years it's almost unthinkable, because as I said, I hadn't ever imagined doing this. What I hope the trend is, and everybody always have these dire ideas. I hope if there is a trend that it's that that little blip that was the ebook is reminding us how much books as objects matter to us, and that the rather larger whatever it is, the chain bookstore, has reminded us how much independent bookstores mean to us. Because I think the kind of publishing we do goes hand in hand with independent bookstores. And you just can't overlook how important they are. And I'll say, when I first published The Queen of Paradise Garden and sat down and did cold calls across the country to bookstores saying, I live in Newfoundland and I just published this book, and I would really love it if you would take it in your bookstore. Many kind of said, yeah, it sounds lovely, get a distributor. Mitzi is one of the people who actually was one of the first bookstores that came on. And it really means a lot for me to be able to say publicly how much it meant. That was a little vote of support. Even the people who very nicely said, no, thank you. It was nice, but to have somebody say, yeah, sure, send me a few, I'll try and see what happens. That was amazing. And the trend I want to believe is happening is that small presses that have something to say about who they are and who the people in their community are back on the rise, and that small bookstores who have something to say about the kind of world they want to live in and the kind of value they place on the printed word and on the community are back on the rise too. And I think if it's going to work, it's got to be because the community supports the independent bookstore and the independent publisher, and that we all work together to value the things that make the world just a little bit better place to be in for us as readers and writers and publishers and thinkers, and because it doesn't happen without that sense of community support.
Oh. I think I'm going to cry. No, really. I mean, this is very touching and means a lot to me. I moved away from 20 years of documentary filmmaking because I felt I couldn't make documentaries the way I wanted to anymore. And le hasard sort of brought me into Bouton and publishing, but I've been in literature since I could read, 4 or 5, and I've been writing ever since. And I really make mine the words of my 2 much more experienced colleagues. I strongly believe that there is a future there. I'm seeing it. I mean, I moved into Bouton 3 years ago. We've managed to double sales, one book at a time, hand to hand. But because we believe in them, because we go to the farmers market with the books for the authors, but they can come and meet the public if they wish. But some authors don't want to do that, and we do it for them. So that's one thing also that publishers do that for writers. And I can't predict where it will go, but I know that if it is done with your heart full out and with a sense of what is needed also, and that's where markability comes into play. I mean, I'm aware of some of the things that are happening in my community around reading, etc., and I'm talking to people. So it doesn't mean I'm going to bring books to a simpler vocabulary, but I'm going to be careful of how I place them, how I use them, how I present them. And I think we will survive. I don't know that we will be rich or that I can move Bouton d'Or to making 20 or 25 books a year, which I wouldn't mind because of the richness of what's coming in and of the projects that we're talked to about. I don't know that we'll ever have those means, but I think we will survive. And maybe survive is kind of a key word in a way, but no, it isn't, because basically that's what humans do, at the best of times in a way, in a fruitful sense. So. And ebooks and the sort of gaming of stories, etc. I think there's something that we should invest there, though. I think we should not leave the electronic screens only to the bloody games, and that we should invest it with some interesting proposals and with some literature, with movement and added features. But how do you do it and who can do it? That's the big question. And that's where the means and owning the printing press, that's one thing we don't own. I mean, we can own printing press, or we can decide like we do. And now that we've started saying on the bottom of every book, créé en Acadie, imprimé au Canada, we're seeing the result, imprimé au Canada, and I'm really proud of that. But we'll never own the internet, and we'll never own Amazon. So, even though we try to play in that field, how are we going to manage owning that technology? I don't know. Maybe there's some people working on that, and maybe in 10 years' time we'll meet and we'll have something to talk about. But right now, the idea is interesting, but the means is not there.
So, publishing trends. When I worked in a bookstore back in the 80s, there was 2 types of books. There was hardcover books and mass market books. And, well, especially in the fiction, anywhere in the fictions. And we had 2 shelves of trade paperbacks, and they were way up high, and it was like Toni Morrison, and there was very few trade paperbacks back then. And that was not that long ago. Probably, I don't know, maybe longer than I think. But anyway, even our shelves wouldn't accommodate trade paperbacks. And now mass markets are, I don't even, if I see a book, it's only in mass market, I don't know if I want to buy it because the print is so small. So things change, but things have been changing. I mean, it's an evolving world, whether we want to believe it or not. I was interviewed one time by allnovascotia.com. They were asking about what I thought about the e-books. This was, again, I don't know, eight years ago or so, when they first started to be on the scene. And I said, it's a different format. We've always been able to look at art in books, but when you go and you see the artwork in person, you have a totally different experience. And I believe it's the same thing, holding a book versus reading one on the screen or looking at a picture of a book. You just have a different experience. And so that was me predicting at the time that there's always going to be this market for both. And what I do see is maybe the death of the mass market book, and that's becoming more where the people are buying the people who would buy that type of mass market book would be more likely to buy an ebook. But as far as what we do, and looking at what we've always done, I mean, we have actually, since I started working with Nimbus, we've really changed. We did almost publish no children's books back then, and we've really evolved on that front. There is a good, strong market for our regional books, for our children's books, for beautiful books, and I just think as long as we keep doing what people want, people will still read them and want to buy them. So I think that's my answer to that. So
One thing I will say in favor of ebook, as you've all been saying, there's room for everything ultimately. And at 11 o'clock at night, when you want to read a book and you can buy it in an instant and have it downloaded in an instant, and you're not bounded by the pages, and you can fall into this world just by doing, that's a beautiful experience and an aesthetic experience in and of itself, which does not compete with the physical book, but it creates its own world as well. So there's lots of bring it on. I welcome it.
Well, I just want to respond to that because, I mean, back to, these broader species issues, we're not really good at that as a species. We're not good at, for all of our talk of multi-platform and multitasking, it's baloney. Like we're really good at sort of getting in the rut and going in a direction. And so what happens, one of the, I think, things we have to watch, again, is sort of the forgetting that there's a better hammer than the dollar store hammer, like I was talking about earlier in a way. And so what happens is that the ebook comes along and it looks like it's the big thing, and you get huge people like Amazon and Apple and so on behind it because there's money to be made, right? So that's legal. That's all right. However, what happens is that it narrows the field. It narrows where people will invest their time and their energy and their attention, and it narrows, say, what our concept of the state of the art is. So suddenly your granting agencies are saying, well, if you're not doing ebooks, then you're not really the real thing. And you have libraries saying, well, why are we getting ebooks and getting physical books? And they make the mistake of sort of equating them as being, this is as good as or the same as that, when they are two completely different tools that have different functions and good functions. My God, if I've used this example before. It's the best I can think of, so please forgive me if you've heard me say it. But I mean, I have Thoreau's journals in a PDF that's searchable, and I have like the Houghton Mifflin sort of original kind of same one. And when I want to sit down and read, like there's something about sitting down and reading Thoreau's journals in that edition, where I kind of remember that there was something, I think it was partway through the second volume on the left-hand page and halfway down, and I find it, and there's something about how we read and stay with the book in the physical that's different. But what I want to know how many times Henry talks about pine trees, I don't go counting it in the physical book. I use this other tool that has this added, value, this added component. They're both valuable, but they're not the same. And so this is our danger, I think, as we sort of wander into this sort of new area and these new technologies, is that we equate them and we make them the same thing. Because if we throw out all of our hammers, even the dollar store ones, because we've got air nailers, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, well, and sometimes certain hammers eclipse other hammers, right? So as a librarian, I can say we're not buying a lot of printed concordances anymore. We don't really have those print indexes where you have to go, use up half your library space. Some things, they do
How many of us have gone back
lose
to
their
all
utility.
this in our phone books?
Oh, yeah.
Try to find out, no one's going to know when I left Wolf for the Moved to the Mountain by looking at phone book anymore, because there's no phone book.
Well, I still need phone books because I don't know how to spell names, and so then I need the alphabetization. But I think that there's utility to a broad range of print formats, including e-format. So, questions from the floor? Yes, David.
No, this is better. As academics, we all depend on your work, and we are so grateful that you find and publish and make available to us texts that we can recover after. And if we had to go through archives to find the good stuff that somehow got missed, we would be so lost. So we really depend, and I think you know how grateful we are for what you've done and for what your colleagues through history have done for us. This is the long-winded part. To the question, in your relationship with academics and the academy and with the university, what's the most important part of that component? What can we do that's more helpful to you? What do we do that you'd like us to stop doing? Is there anything in your relationship with the academy, what's helpful, what's not?
Yes, put them on courses, buy them, stop asking for free copies. That would be very, very helpful. Actually, I was going to be a little facetious, but just talk about us. And when I say us, I bring it back to Bouton d'Or, but I mean basically to children's literature. There are about 4 anthologies of littérature acadienne, and though Bouton d'Or has been founded by the founder of Acadian Literature Studies, there's no talk about children's literature in those anthologies. So, I mean, if you're here, it's because you're interested, so the message is not for you. But often children's literature, I mean, less and less, and I know universities are putting up courses, but on the Francophone side, it's certainly not happening. And yet there's some very important pieces of work that are being done. And if you're talking about Canadian history, do look at the Acadian history as written by the Acadians in French. Thank you.
This is onto the buy books part of it, but especially within, from my colleagues who do more educational, direct academic publishing, but for all of us, there's a lot going on right now in the world of copyright. And the other day I had one of our authors contact us because their entire book was put up. It was a children's book, and the teacher scanned the book and put the entire book on her teacher website and had the kids read the book, and that does not constitute fair use for education. So even talking about copyright and educational, what we think would be fair use, and maybe teaching a respect of the work that people put into that, and when you're giving it away for free or looking for it for free, it is, writers don't make much to begin with, and that is sort of a very difficult position for them to be in. And it's not very nice for them to have to come to us and say, can you get your legal department to look into this? And I feel bad because this teacher, but it is a big issue in our world right now. So,
yeah, I think this should be addressed to education teachers, like les départements qui enseignent aux enseignants.
Sure. One of my younger brothers did a PhD in philosophy, and that any of us ended up in school really is quite amazing. Growing up in rural New Brunswick and all. But anyway, so he did a PhD in philosophy, started engineering at UNB, didn't really like it, and ended up in philosophy. A logical move. And now he teaches middle school, which I think is awesome, actually. But when he was sort of in the middle, the height of sort of his working on his philosophy degree, I said to him, "So what's your thesis about?" And he said, "Oh, you wouldn't understand. It's too complex." I said, "Try me." And I mean, that's a silly story, but as it turned out, I'd been reading in the area he was writing about, which he didn't know. But, what can you do? Well, I think there's a fundamental disconnect, I think, often between the academy and the community. And, there are so many astonishing things that you folks are working on and uncovering, and not just in the arts, but in the sciences and right across the board. And we make the assumption too often that it's just for the group, just for the specialist. And, I think that there are often ways to make ourselves better understood without compromising on, the robustness of what we are working on. And so my sort of charge to you I challenge you to make yourself understood. I challenge you to engage a broader readership if we're talking about publishing. And so we do, as I said earlier, probably more scholarly publishing than most literary presses would bother with. But we do a very specific kind of scholarly publishing, and that we're looking, we end up working with authors who are very engaged with a broader, trade readership, that they are talking about things, writing about things in a way that I can sell it to. I still believe in that ideal general reader. Not the specialized reader, not just the the Oprah Book Club reader. These are all legitimate types of readers, but I actually believe in this notion of the general reader, someone who will work a little harder once in a while when they hit something that they don't know right off the top of their heads what it means. They will go back and reread it a second time because they're interested. And I challenge you to reach out to those readers, because that's how we build community. That's how we take the things that you guys are working on that are so important to, again, citizenship, to our communities working, that we need you out here. Don't just hide in your offices. And talk at conferences. Talk to us. Some of us are interested.
And I guess I'll just say that it's great to remind your students as well about books as made things, a little bit about the history of that. One of the things I have recently, as you moved the press from St. John's to Torres Cove, aka Tourist Cow. And one of the only things I regret about that move is that when I was in town, the history of the book class used to come to the printing press. And so the teacher, Agnes, would bring her students, and they'd all see the type, and they'd get to use I've got an iron hand press that was built in London in the 1830s, and they would use the hand press, and they'd see, and it was so exciting for me to see them, because they'd studied all this stuff and they knew it intellectually, but to see them get their hands a little bit dirty and to play with it and to hear them say, "Oh, this is so satisfying." And sometimes the creative writing classes would come as well, and just to remind them that there is a physical, tactile aspect to all of these things that they're studying, that they're wonderful ideas, they're important ideas, they're beautiful ideas, but those ideas are associated with beautiful, wonderful, tactile things as well. And it's a great thing to remind your students.
Helen's hand went up faster and with more emphasis, Kara.
It's one of the basic situations about children's literature that it is almost always written by adults, published by adults, edited by adults, marketed by adults, and mediated by adults to particular children. And I would want to know from you guys whether you ever think about the other side of that. if there is a way of making the publishing process more accessible to children who want to produce their own cultural materials, who want to take part in the citizenship of their community in a more direct way. Is there a way to facilitate this, and how would you do it?
Would you like to answer that, Sophie? Could we, is that a problem? Yeah. Why don't you say a couple of things?
Well, I work for a nonprofit organization when I'm not working on my own writing, and I work as a family literacy facilitator. And one of the projects that we work on is to work with parents and children and help them write books together. So those are self-published books, and in my opinion, that's a really good place for self-publishing, because it gives, you know, children a place to have, and they work with their parents, which is a really nice combination. Like we always think about reading with our children, but writing with our children is also an excellent activity and a wonderful thing to do. And then they end up with a self-published product that they can use and read together and give to grandma, grandpa, send it to Toronto, Newfoundland, wherever the relatives are, and say, this is our lives, this is what we wrote together. At this point in Kings and Annapolis County, we've written over 1,000 books over the last 7 years. So when we work in different locations, right now the project is mostly focused with families that are kind of living on the fringes in the valley, so people that have low income, you know, low education, that kind of stuff. So that's who we're targeting right now, which makes even more sense to me then. But anyway, that might answer your question a little bit.
Pass it up front, too. And Marie, okay.
Well, when I mentioned about self-publishing, and I talked about Sophie, I was thinking about this. Well, it's a very interesting question, but I'm not completely comfortable with it, because I don't feel that there is a difference between myself and a child. Honestly, I mean, in my eyes, I'm sometimes 5 and sometimes I'm 100 years old. And I think in a way, children are like that also. Sometimes they're very precocious old people, and sometimes they're full of life and full of naivety. I'm not sure, but one thing that pops up right out, and perhaps this is not the place, but I often get requests from either parents or school teachers, never from children themselves, and I'm talking of, oh, this was written by so-and-so, and it's so beautiful, and can you tell us how to publish her, or how we should publish her? And I find this very difficult, because I don't want to discourage anyone, but I've seen these young authors published and pushed by their parents most of the time. And maybe I know that that's not what you're talking about, but still, how do you make that? Like a community project where children are involved, I take scripts and I have them read by kids sometimes when I'm not sure, or script manuscripts. But apart from that, I don't know, but maybe, yeah.
I too still think I'm a child. I have to say this because Deirdre is sitting right here, but when I was in perhaps, grade 4 maybe, Deirdre came to my classroom and spoke to us, and I was, oh my God. I still feel like that sometimes when I see Deirdre. Oh my God, she's a real author. So I still sort of feel like that I am connected to that part of me. But back to what your question is, and one of the funnest things I've ever done as a publisher was go into a classroom and speak to kids as a publisher, and talked about the process. And so it was a grade 5-6 class that I was dealing with, and after that they had so much enthusiasm about it that they decided as a project through it was a BMO entrepreneur project that they were going to publish their own book. And when I was approached by my friend who was a teacher, I decided I would publish that book for them, because it was really just very sweet. It was a whole very sweet project, and they did all of the illustrations, they did all the text. the teacher and I edited it. They didn't like that very much. So they had to go through that process as well. And then they were on TV talking about the book and on the radio and in the newspaper and how it got published. And this, when I went to the class for the book launch, they said this, like there were some of the kids in the class, because this was a the area of Halifax, Spryfield, which is, there's a broad range of kids in the class, and kids were coming up to me saying that this book changed their life, and so that was one of the most exciting things. So even if that book hadn't come out of it, they would have done their own book, and I think they probably would have felt the same way, although it was really cool for them to be published by a publisher. But people ask us to do this stuff all the time. As you know, we were here asked to do this today. But the most fun thing that I ever did was being asked to go to the classroom. So ask us, We might say no, we might say yes, but that can engage them in a way that, about the whole publishing process in a way that they have never, and take writers into the schools, like me having Deirdre come to my classroom so many years ago. Maybe that's why I'm here. You don't know what's going to happen from having those people come into the classrooms and engaging in that way.
Can I make a quick comment about this question and the question before? In 2010, the Congress of the Social Sciences and Humanities was held in Fredericton, so the largest collection of academics in Canada. And at that time, with CSTACS, we did a display of Atlantic Canadian books for children in the Wallace collection as a means of, broadening out. It was open to the wide community. But I worked throughout the school year with the enrichment coordinators across the district on projects of visual literacy, and all these schools created their own picture books that were then part of the display. So their books were beside your books, and it was just wonderful. The only thing we needed was more space, because there were about 120 people who came to a very tiny room. But there are ways of making that happen in meaningful ways, I think. Sorry.
I'll just say that in Newfoundland there's a really fabulous program called Art Smarts, and I don't know if maybe you have that elsewhere, where the artists and writers will go into the classroom and work on projects. And I know a lot of people who've gone in and worked with different classes to write stories, make books, so that sometimes it'll be teamed with a book artist and a writer. I know Janet McNaughton has gone in with Jennifer Morgan, I believe, and Jennifer Morgan has gone in and done graphic novels, and Andy's gone in and done, storytelling and helped kids develop stories. And so there's that. I mean, at a more immediate level, they can often do that and develop their books that way. So it gives them at least an insight to and an appreciation for that idea that a book is something that you can make. It doesn't just have to be something that somebody picks for you and you read, but you have a story and you can find ways to develop it and to tell it. On the other side of that, the way you preface the question, Helene, was about that conundrum about, it's always adults who market it and buy it and publish it and write it, and that's one of the fundamental things that makes children's literature so fascinating and so compelling. This has always been for me. And so even when I was saying in response to an earlier question, people think that because it's for kids that they want a bright color. Well, here I am, a grown-up, saying it's for kids. Maybe they don't want a bright color, but I'm still not a kid. As immature as I usually am, I'm still not a kid, and I have that distance. And I know writers who go and practice their stories on kids, to get that response. And I know others who just this is what I'm writing, and this is where I'm from, and that's it. But I think that's a really important conundrum, and it's something that has always needs to be considered for teachers, for booksellers, for writers, for publishers. That's one of the things that makes children's literature such a fascinating realm for me.
Yeah, I like the question, though. I'm not really sure how to give you a good answer for it. I mean, in some ways, it's a question about what our relationship is and where children fit into the ecosystem of culture, and that we often sort of relegate them to the back seat, very much. And I'm publishing primarily for adults, so I'm dealing with this question a different way. But I mean, I do receive, probably a dozen or so a year manuscripts from people ranging from the age of 12 to 18, say, with the other hundreds and hundreds of things. And so I guess my response is that I'm really disinterested in how old somebody is. As far as from the mercantile activity of being a publisher, I don't care whether you're 12 or 108. I mean, I'm really looking at the rigor of the work. And it's been my experience that it's difficult for a 12-year-old to have the kind of rigor that is necessary to create a commercial, cultural object. And that's okay. I mean, they're 12. And so you have to sort of ask yourself, so how else do I engage with this? And programs like Sophie's talking about are just brilliant. Because really, these are gateway drugs. And we need to do everything we can to ruin these children for normal sort of passive engagement with the cultural industrial complex. So I'm very good at ignoring adults. But if a child walks into my print shop, you can bet that their initial goes on a printing press and they crank the handle, right? Because I want to ruin them for normal, gainful employment. I want them to look at the world through new eyes and say, I made this, right? And to say, not only that, but I can make things. And to say, things get made here, where I live, not necessarily just in China or Sarnia or wherever. Stuff gets made here, right? So I see, the root of your question, I think, is that what is our interaction, with children in this sort of ecosystem of culture? And we do have to take it seriously. It may not be putting them in that role of responsibility of being an author before they're ready.
Okay, we are getting close to 4. I know Kara has a question, but we may not have time for everybody to answer, but we'll see where it goes, if that's okay. And one thing I just want to say in reply to that as well, I think that we as the adults who do mediate children's literature, we often speak of children as a universal. And the more we remember that there are as many diverse children as there are diverse adults, the less we fall into the trappings of being these gatekeepers and mediators, right? That's sort of always been my philosophy around librarianship. Kara?
Speaking of ecosystems, publishing ecosystems, I've always wondered, how do publishers feel about used bookstores?
Again, I owe my life to used bookstores. It's hard to sort of take, I think that in a healthy culture, the new books are selling and finding their way back into the used bookstores, so there's, it's fine. I have a bigger problem, say, with massive remaindering and the way that stuff gets out there. So that's a sort of multinational practice. That's not a healthy community practice. Like, I really enjoy buying used bookstores in my used bookstore in this community, because it's like looking in people's windows, right? Like it's like, because it's like, not only did I find that, like, there's a book on the shelf, and my God, it's the book I need to read. Like, there's Wendell Berry's poems. How did somebody know I love Wendell Berry's poems? And yet they did, and they brought it here, and now and somebody else in my community, I don't necessarily know who, also read these poems. So I love that community aspect of used bookstores. But I think that the real, like, if we want to point the finger at, like, these are economic problems that the public industry is facing, the used bookstores aren't the problem. Libraries not buying books, that's a problem. The predatory practices of the multinationals, that's not so cool. The kind of gong show practices of our giant chains, also not cool. These are where the real problems are, not used bookstores.
That was great, Andrew. That's yeah, actually, absolutely. I love to poke around in used bookstores. If I find a book and I'm sure that I can get it at my independent bookstore or my independent book dealer, who actually is in the room now. Hi, Matthew. Matthew, Broken Books, the great little independent bookstore in St. John's, Newfoundland. If I know he can get it for me, then I'll usually go and ask him to get it for me. But if it's a really hard to find one or it's out of print, that's great. And the only reason is because I love the idea of authors getting paid for their work. And I don't think used bookstores are the big problem. But, if I can contribute liked paying. Now, I would like to see publishers get paid for the work, but I'm a publisher. I totally understand that that's fantasy. But I would love to I'd love to see authors get paid for the work. So.
Yeah, that sums it up.
I'm like Andrew, I love bookstores of any kind, so I'm kind of biased that way. So the one thing that we don't like is when we go into used bookstores and see our promotional copies and review copies. They're sometimes on the shelves with even the press release is still inside them. So that's a little bit of a bugbear. One time we had one of our used bookstores wanted me included on our promotional projects that we do through the Atlantic Publishers Association, and she said, I have all these books. I have all these, like she went through a list of all the books from Nimbus that she had in the store that we didn't sell to her. So she was getting those new books from somebody. So that's the only bugbear we have around it. But otherwise, we love bookstores, of all kinds, I think, most of us.
All right. Well, I would like to thank all of our panelists today. So you give them a round of applause while I get your gift. The Raddall Symposium, we do have a small gift for each person on the panel, but I know that I have also given you all the gift of spending a lot of money already this week, and I am about to go back and spend a whole lot
We all have to go buy
more money. But one thing I want to say is another way you can help publishers and local authors is pick up a second copy of stuff and get it into the schools near you. You know, like if you happen to have, if you're going to give $20 to someone who comes to your door, just pick up another book and pick up one of Marie's books and drop it off to a French immersion classroom if you can. And there's lots of books back there, so you've got a half an hour before the puppet show. Spend wisely. And thank you so much for coming.